All right, let's get into it. We're going to dive into some really fascinating ancient wisdom from the Desert Fathers. And what's wild is how their strategies for mastering the mind feel, well, surprisingly modern. So you hear a quote like that from the 4th century, and it sounds pretty dramatic, right? Continuous combat against the forces of darkness. But the real battle they were talking about, it wasn't against some demon with horns and a pitchfork out in the desert. Nope. The fight was way more subtle and a lot closer to home. And that right there, that's really the heart of their whole philosophy. So, what we're doing here is unpacking their guide to that inner combat. We're going to look at these incredible strategies they developed, like 1700 years ago, all designed to win the war that's happening inside. Okay, so strategy number one. The first rule of any fight is know your enemy. And for these monks, the enemy was, well, incredibly sneaky, a true master of disguise. And here's where it gets really interesting. When they talked about temptation, it almost never showed up looking like something obviously evil. Get this, the most dangerous traps, the biggest deceptions, they actually looked holy. They looked virtuous. This story just illustrates the point perfectly. So you've got this young monk, he's deep in his own private prayer. Suddenly, these, well, demons, but they're disguised as angels of light, appear, and they tell him he should go join the community prayer service. Now, on the surface, that sounds like a good thing to do, right? But it was a trick. It was a distraction to pull him away from the one thing he was supposed to be doing in that exact moment. It was a perfect trap of falsified holiness. So later in the story, these same demons try to mess with the monk's head by pointing out that his spiritual guide once lied. But the elder explains what happened. See, he'd refused to lend money to someone, even though he had it. Why? Because he knew, with his wisdom, that the money would actually cause that person way more spiritual damage. So his discernment, his wisdom, it went way beyond just following simple rules. It was about seeing the deeper truth of the situation. All right, so that's knowing your enemy. But that's just the first step. For strategy number 2, we get into training your will. Because, look, just knowing who you're up against isn't enough. A warrior has to be disciplined. Their will needs to be forged like steel. And this is something I think we can all relate to, right? Have you ever faced a task that was so huge, so overwhelming that you just kind of froze? You didn't even know where to start, so you did nothing. Well, the Desert Fathers had this perfect little story, a parable, for that exact feeling. So you see the lesson here, right? It's brilliant. The point is that real victory, whether it's over bad habits or some huge project, it doesn't come from one single heroic push. No, it comes from patient, consistent, small actions. Just focus on clearing the little patch of ground you can sleep on today. That's it. But, discipline is also about understanding the part we play in our own struggles. And they had this incredibly powerful metaphor for this, involving the famous cedars of Lebanon. Think about it like this. The temptation, the demon, whatever, that's just the iron head of an axe. By itself, it can't do much. It's our inner complicity, our will, that acts as the wooden handle. Without the handle that we provide, the axe is basically useless against the tree. We're the ones who give the temptation a way to hurt us. Okay, now for strategy 3. And this one is pretty radical. See, the Desert Fathers didn't think you should try to eliminate powerful feelings like anger or desire. Not at all. Instead, they believed you just had to aim those feelings at the right target. They basically saw these passions as God-given energies that had just gotten pointed in the wrong direction. Imagine a powerful river that's flooded its banks and is just causing chaos everywhere. The goal isn't to somehow dry up the river, right? The goal is to build new channels and direct that power back to where it can actually be useful. So for the spiritual warrior, the job isn't to put out your inner fire. It's to stop pointing it at other people, which, by the way, they called a fantastic phrase, an act of energetic uselessness. Instead, you take that fire and you turn it with all its force against your own flaws, your own bad habits, the real enemy within. And all of this leads us to their ultimate strategy. And I gotta say, to our modern way of thinking, this one is probably the most counterintuitive of them all. And honestly, the best way to explain it is just to tell you this wild story. So the story starts with this elder, this spiritual master, and he sees the dung from a fierce lioness that's known to live in a tomb nearby. And he just casually turns to his disciple, a guy named John, and says, "Hey, go get me that dung." So John naturally asks, What about the lioness? And the elder, who's really just kind of joking around, says, oh, if she comes at you, just tie her up and bring her here. But here's the thing. John, in his absolute radical obedience, doesn't hear a joke. He hears a direct command. So, just as you'd expect, as John gets close, the lioness charges him. But, and this is the crazy part, instead of running away screaming, John, who feels completely empowered by this command, he starts chasing the lioness. He's literally yelling at this lion, wait, my Abba told me to catch you. And what happens? It works. Miraculously, it works. He actually catches the lioness, ties it up, and brings it back to his spiritual father, who is, as you can imagine, completely and utterly stunned. And this is the whole point. See, John's obedience wasn't because the command made sense. I mean, it was an absurd command. His obedience was to the person giving the command. It was a complete surrender of his own judgment, trusting the wisdom of his elder over his own fear and reason. And the Desert Fathers believed that this kind of trust, this kind of surrender, could unlock a power that's way beyond what we can normally do. So, okay, a field of weeds, a lion you can catch by yelling at it, demons that look like angels. This all sounds pretty ancient, right? So the big question is, why should any of this matter to us today, 1700 years later? Well, if you just change the language a little, the struggles are exactly the same. They're universal. They're demons, that's our endless notifications, our social media feeds, all the distractions pulling at our attention 24/7. Their asceticism, that's just the focus and discipline we're all trying to find in this chaotic world. This stuff isn't just ancient history. It's basically a user's manual for self-mastery. And for these ancient monks, this was the starting point, the absolute foundation. It wasn't about big, grand gestures or heroic sacrifices. It was about the simple but incredibly powerful act of obedience, trusting a guide, a principle, a wisdom that's bigger than you are. That, they said, was the first and most crucial step if you really wanted to change. So it leaves us with a pretty powerful question to think about. In the battle for your own mind, who's writing your strategy? Is it you, with all your fleeting impulses and limited perspectives? Or are you tapping into something deeper, a more timeless kind of wisdom? It's definitely something to chew on. Thanks for watching.